I'm ready. Heather, you ready?
Yes.
We're ready. We're ready. Okay. All right. So it is now 6:32 p.m. and thank you to the people that took time out of your evening to come and share your evening with us. We're going to try to make this as fast and as informative as possible. So let me call this special joint meeting of the City Council and the Board of Finance to order. For the record, today is Tuesday, May 20th, 2025. It looks like we have a combination of attendance for the respective boards, some in person and some remote. So for the record, I'll do the head count representing the Board of Finance. I have Deb Iannacido, I have Lorraine Pesky, I have Wendy Traub, and Jim Wright attending in person. I see that Christopher Anderson is online. I don't know, is Chris Bayes? I can't, and
Yep, I'm here.
Christopher Bayes. Thank you, Chris. The two Chris's are attending via Zoom. Representing the City Council in person this evening, we have a full complement. We have Councilman Waldron, Councilman Iveyne, Councilwoman Spino, Councilwoman Ruette, Councilman Cavanero, and Councilman Oliver. So that is all members of both boards. And before we get into the agenda, could we stand and pledge the flag, please? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States. Okay. So on this agenda, there are 3 items for the joint meeting. The first is a review and discussion regarding the city budget for fiscal year 7/1/25 through June 30th, 2026. The second one indicates a vote by the City Council to approve the proposed city department budgets. They actually did that last night. So all of those budgets have been approved. And with the motions were to approve the budget appropriation and to advance it to the Board of Finance. So we do not need to do item number 2. But this gives me a little more time to walk through where we are with budget development. So I'm gonna take the first, and just so that we can control the discussion, I will entertain a motion to open the floor for review and discussion. Do I have a motion, please? Thank you, Councilman Oliver.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. So the motion is to open the floor for discussion and review of the budgets. I'll call it. All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Good, okay. So do you want to pull up the presentation? So as you heard me in my opening comments, in the City Council's meeting last night, I'm going to back up a little bit. So how our budgets are developed is by February 15th, all of our city departments are required to submit their department requests into the city. Those department requests are then advanced to both the City Council and the Board of Finance. We have a budget subcommittee that consists of 2 members from the City Council, 2 members from the Board of Finance, and 2 members from the Board of Safety that then meet with the department heads over well, we ended up with slightly over 2 months to review in detail every request. You know, the salary line items are discussed, their training line items, any of the expenses in those budgets. When the budget subcommittee completes their review of those budgets, they then forward the recommendations for any changes in that budget to the City Council. Those changes are incorporated and advanced to the council as a level 3 request. Last night is what the council approved, level 3 requests. The original budget request, Erica, do you want to walk through what the original department head requests were and where we ended up? I know it's in this.
Page 11.
Yeah, page 11. Got it? 11.
Got it.
10. 10 is us, 11 is the Board of Ed.
Sorry.
So the department head level requests were $75,982,270. Like the mayor mentioned, we have a process that we go through. The mayor and the finance team meet with the department heads, briefly review their budgets. That gets submitted to the budget subcommittee, which is a level 2. They review also, it's probably about 2 months of a process that we go through. Every budget, we meet with department heads. From that, the budget subcommittee recommends budget reductions. This year, they have reduced the budget request by $3,110,175. That request was sent to the council, which was approved last night, which brings us to a budget request of $72,827,094.83.
Thank you. So that explains on the city side what our process is. It's done, as you hear, from February 15th to here we are, May 20th, with these leveled reviews. So I'm going to start in and talk a little bit about the challenges. Usually that process brings us to a point where the Board of Finance can then take over the recommendations from the City Council, and they can start looking at those revenues that come in outside of tax revenues and revenues that are provided through tax collection, and they start to whittle away at what they feel is a reasonable request for the taxpayers to be able to afford. This year is very different, and I think it's the reason why all of you are here. So I'm going to go through very slowly some of the factors that make this budget adoption very challenging for us this year. So this page, which is page 2 in our packets, is what are the factors that are impacting our tax base this year? Number 1, it's the revaluation. So as we all know, the revaluation, which was completed on 10/1/2024, that is the 5-year I call it the mid-cycle revaluation. This is a paper valuation. It is a revaluation based on sales that are recorded over the 5-year period since the last full physical revaluation. We are 5 years away from doing another full physical revaluation. The paper valuation, the appraisers come in, they pull all the pertinent sales records, what happened with residential real estate, what happened with commercial real estate, and through a fine-tuned methodology, establish values based on where the property is, how large the lot is, how large the house is, how many rooms are in that house, and they apply those valuations across the board. The interesting thing that happened since the 2019 full physical revaluation is we went through a pandemic. Interest rates for loans were offered at 1% and 2%, and the real estate market exploded. Residential homes in the city of Torrington were being sold within hours of being put on the market at prices that were sometimes 2 to 2.5 times market value at that time. And they were subject to bidding wars. Many times the sellers were receiving multiple bids over asking price. Those sales became the baseline for our revaluation. During that period of time, over the last 5 years, from 10/1/19 to 10/1/24, residential properties, those are the houses that we all live in, increased an average of 95%. I can tell you that's an average. Some people saw a 70% increase in their property. Some saw a $125,000 increase in their property. Average increase for a residential home was about $95,000. So if you opened up your mail and you saw your assessment and you said, my assessment doubled, that's it. That's that number right there. The commercial properties, not so much. When people were coming up and buying our homes, they were not buying commercial properties. They weren't buying the former mill sites. They weren't buying the strip malls. They weren't buying any of the commercial spaces. And those properties did experience an increase, and a much larger increase than we've had over the past 10 years, but only 40%, half of what the residential properties increased. So you can already see that there is a disparity and an unequal increase in our tax base. The personal property increased just very modestly, and our motor vehicles decreased in value. So again, I stress that while the increase in property values, we know you increase your grand list, you can reduce your mill rate. However, when you have this disparity in how those values increased, there is no wholesale, it went up 100%, let's reduce the mill rate 50%. It doesn't work that way in this situation. Due to that unequal distribution and the reduction of the taxable motor vehicles, our residential properties will see a higher tax increase as a result of what happened with valuations. So if we can go to the next screen, please. So again, what are those factors that are impacting our tax base this year? We will see a loss in our motor vehicle transition grant funds. I am putting here, a few assumptions, but I can tell you that we're looking at a loss of about $3.7 million in transition grant funding. To explain what that is, the state of Connecticut, a number of years ago, mandated a mill rate cap on all motor vehicles in the state of Connecticut. That mill rate cap stands at 32.46. The city of Torrington, for all of you taxpayers know, we have been paying a mill rate of 47.96. So you can see the difference is 15 mills. And when the state imposed that cap, they assured all the municipalities that nobody would lose any revenue, that they were going to make it up to us by providing grant funds for the difference between our tax-paying rate of 47.97 and the 32.46. In the current fiscal year, the budget year that we're just about to wrap up, based on that mill rate of 47.97, the state of Connecticut reimbursed the city $5,488,664. That was in the form, and they call it a transition grant. As we lower the mill rate, that reimbursement will go down, keeping in mind that what the state is paying us is the difference between our mill rate and the mill rate cap. So if we look at a mill rate for fiscal year 26, the budget we're trying to adopt, and if we're able to drop that mill rate to say 38.25, the reimbursement that would come from the state of Connecticut would drop to about $1.7 million, resulting in a loss of revenue of $3.7 million, which when you lose that revenue, that means we have to look to our taxpayers to fill that gap. Next screen, please. If there are questions from anybody as I'm hitting a screen, feel free to interrupt and ask a question to the board members, and then we'll get to the public after for the public hearing. So staying on the topic of what are the factors that are impacting our tax base this year. The Board of Education's departure from our joint insurance program or plan results in a loss of $2.1 million. Those are premium cost shares that were deducted from the Board of Education's employees' paychecks and deposited into the general fund to cover the expenses of both the Board of Education employees. Same thing with the city employees. Their premium cost share deposited to general fund and helps defray the cost of providing insurance coverage for the employees. The Board of Education did move successfully to a fully insured plan, and in doing so, will be retaining the employee premium cost shares and using those cost shares to net their cost of insurance in their expense budgets. This equates to a change in accounting practices. It will result in a reduction in their insurance cost on that budget line item. However, because in the state of Connecticut, boards of education are protected from any budget volatility by being guaranteed a minimum budget requirement. We affectionately refer to it as an MBR. That guarantees they will never receive an allocation of funding less than the prior year's allocation. So while they're able to use the $2.1 million to offset their expenses, it does not reduce the bottom line of their appropriation. And so this change in budgeting practice does not result in any savings to the taxpayers. It simply allows the Board of Education to move their spending, increase their spending in other line items within their budget. In essence, the change is an accounting practice which provides the Board of Education an extra $2 million in spending. Next page, please. Staying on the what factors are impacting our tax base this year. The Board of Education in 2018 was designated an Alliance District. At that time, the state of Connecticut identified that the Board of Education needed assistance in providing resources that would be focused on changing any of the educational deficiencies that created low test scores, low graduation rates, chronic absenteeism, those kinds of issues that make it qualified or have it fall below a certain testing standard that the state has. So in 2018, the designation resulted in the education cost share being frozen at the 2013 funding level, and any increases in the education cost share would be sent directly to the Board of Education in the form of, they call it an Alliance District grant. It is actually an ECS carve-out. In FY25, that total amount being sent to the Board of Education is the highlighted number in the first column, $9,356,223. So again, just to identify, the ECS, which is education cost share, is now being treated in two parts. The $23 million, which is paid into the operating fund to offset the taxpayers' cost of providing education. And this $9,300,000 is sent directly to the boards of education to cover additional services and educational enhancements to help bring those test scores and all those other educational initiatives to bring them up to a state expectation. Next screen, please. By the way, this screen, for those of you that are so inclined, I do have a link, the ed application name. It came up then when I copied the link to the state's website. You can simply hit that link and it'll take you right to the state's website, and you can review all of the grants that are paid to the, directly to the Board of Education. I do, thank you. All right, staying on the topic, what are these, what are these factors that are impacting our tax base? So with the Board of Education's continued designation from 2018 to 2025, their continuation as a designation of Alliance District results in any increases that the state may make in payment for education cost share will always go directly to the Board of Education. The funds that are made available to the general fund, the tax to offset the taxpayer's share, is still frozen at that 2013 level of 23 million and change, and we'll go through those numbers. This page shows the governor's proposed fiscal year 26 state budget from municipal aid to the city of Torrington. As you can see in the yellow highlight, we are showing they are identifying that $34,711,906 is going to be provided for educational cost share. That is a change of $1.3 million over last year. However, that $1.3 million is added to the $9 million from the prior screen, resulting in an Alliance District carve-out of $10,675,044. There are other carve-outs here that I'll get into on a later screen. But as a reminder, the portion of the ECS fund that will be available for general fund budget adoption is $23,556,125. Next screen, please. Staying on the topic, with the Board of Education's continuation as a designation, in its designation as an Alliance District, this $10,675,044 is sent directly to the Board of Education. They do have to report to the state of Connecticut how they spend those funds. They are supposed to be targeted to address any of those underperforming measures that cause it to be an Alliance District. And I just always feel compelled to remind the boards at this point in time when we talk about these budgets that once the Board of Education is successful in raising those test scores and meeting all of those metrics that the state has established, which would allow them to be released from the Alliance District designation, all of that revenue, the $10 million in revenue, and all of the expenses that are funded by that carve-out will be rolled back into our operating budget, and that becomes the new MBR, the new minimum budget requirement. So every time there's an increase in that Alliance District grant funding and those expenses increase, keep in mind that as they're exited as an Alliance District, all of those funds are rolled back into our operating expenses and are the new minimum budget requirement for the schools and the city. They call it a grant in all of their reporting. It's not a grant. I've met with the commissioner of the Department of Education. She has admitted it, and she has, said it, and everybody that has been working over the last 7 years on this, it's a clear understanding this is not a grant. It is an ECS carve-out. Next page. Yes.
And I do want to expound on that just a minute. As a Board of Finance member, when any department presents their budget to us and we go through the budget, we obviously have that opportunity to either add or subtract from their budget. With this Alliance District money going directly to the Board of Education, the Board of Finance in your town, who obviously oversees all this spending and everything, does not have the opportunity to review their budget on that money. So if they're getting additional $9 or $10 million, what that money is being spent on, we don't have that. We don't see that as part of our budget. So we can't approve or disapprove it understanding that when Alliance District stops, that this becomes the city's minimum budget requirement, even though over the last 8 or 9 years, the city, as the Board of Education, has not had any ability to have any say in it. So that's why the Board of Finance, in my case, that's why we're concerned about the Alliance District designation. And obviously, and I'm sure the Education Department is too, looking for us to not be an Alliance District anymore because all of that funding still comes to the city of Torrington. We're not going to lose $10 million. However, it brings all the revenue back through the city, and it allows the Board of Finance to look at the budget with all of those expenditures in there.
Thank you, Mrs. Straub. And I would also add to that, that the Board of Education is somewhat handcuffed with what it can do with that $10 million. You know, so those have to be spent specifically on initiatives that are going to increase their test scores and increase their standing. It's a double-edged sword being designated as an Alliance District. Sure, the funds are targeted and made available to the Board of Education directly, but it does come with some strings while they are an Alliance District.
Mayor, are you taking questions now, or do you want?
Yeah, please.
All right, so with this carve-out,
Yes.
as the state, if it begins, what, you can't hear me? Okay. Regarding this alliance carve-out, have we, the strategy for the state is that if it starts to back off this carve-out, this $10 million, if it backs off, say, 2 million, and it's now 8 million for Alliance, does that 2 million then default to the general ECS fund? So the total state contribution remains the same?
Yes. So the ECS funding,
Yeah.
regardless whether it's the 23 million sent to the city side for operation or the 10 million for the Alliance, I'm
Designation?
going to use the same terms, the Alliance grant,
Yeah.
will not be reduced. So when they exit the Board of Education from an Alliance District, it's usually they say, you know, you've been successful with these funds that we've provided, with our guidance on how you can spend them. You've been successful. You know, we're going to exit you from an Alliance District, and now those funds will start to be
Okay.
paid over to the city side.
Understood. Okay. Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
But all those expenses also come on their budget. So there's never a reduction in what the Board of Education will have available to it.
No, I get that. I get that. Do we have any indication how successful Torrington Board of Education has been in meeting goals for the Alliance designation?
No, I know that the board does speak about their test scores frequently, but I don't know that there's any report as to how close they are from being able to exit from Alliance Alliance District designation.
Interesting.
I did, and Councilman, I'm sorry. I did ask that question as to how close we are and what is the rubric for that. And I would like more information, because my question is, aren't we trying to go toward that to get out of Alliance District? What is the rubric? I mean, schools are all about rubrics, right? They're all about if you meet these guidelines. And I think the answer I got from them, which is what they have, it's not there, is that it's not so cut and dry. So it's frustrating me on a state level that the state created this Alliance District program. The legislators put it into action how many years ago? But there's no clear, specific check off the box. Okay, Torrington's done this, you know, the test scores have gone up, whatever. I mean, we'll pick up 30%, whatever it was. There's no check boxes that are definitive. It's more, well, let's see how things go. So I'm frustrated with the state. I feel bad for the boards of education that they're presenting this information every year. Here's our test scores. Here's our examples of what we're doing. And I think it's up to somebody on the state side to decide. So it is kind of frustrating for the towns, I think, as well.
Well, frustrating, it's beyond frustrating, isn't it? I mean, this has real impact. Being designated an Alliance School District has absolute impact on our ability to attract families and businesses,
Yes.
because it's, I will characterize it as a kind of black eye on the school district. All right, I know the Board of Education does not want to hear those. So whatever the nicer term for that is, please insert that. But it is not considered a good thing when people look to move to Torrington and quickly they look at, property taxes, prices of homes, and they look at safety issues, and then they look at performance of your school district because they have kids and grandkids. And when they see that, that is telling them that there are some serious flaws in this state, per the state of Connecticut in this education system. So it really, really is important for us to lose that. And the fact that we can't get any really specific information from the state to how we get this monkey off our back is, again, beyond frustrating. It's actually negatively impacting our ability to attract the kinds of businesses and the kinds of families, et cetera, that I think we can all agree we would like to see move into Torrington. So
Yeah.
for anybody here who has made the effort to come here tonight and listen to the presentation, to learn things, this is something to file away and talk to your friends, your relatives, anybody connected to the Board of Education, that find out more about this Alliance School District designation. This is how the state of Connecticut can very, very strongly manipulate what happens in our public school system. And we in the city need to find whatever leverage we can to get a handle on this. So thank you, Mayor, for giving me the time to say that.
Yeah, I will also add, and I appreciate Mrs. Straub's explanation about, who is controlling the decision about exiting from Alliance. I did notice that during the pandemic or shortly after the pandemic, they added another measure or metric, progress towards goal. So if you're not making goal, they started to measure, are you making progress toward that goal? So it's complicated and it's convoluted, and I agree, it's not like you could say, there's the goal, we're this close. It is a, yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, so next slide, please. So staying on the topic of what are those factors that are impacting our tax base for this year, this is actually not new this year. This is something that's been going on for the last 4 or 5 years. So when the state of Connecticut established the legislation to create these alliance districts so that they can direct and guide resources to the boards of education to try to help them, pull up those test scores and be more successful. They should have sunset this Connecticut General Statute 10-262K because this statute pre-existed alliance districts. And this statute was doing the exact same thing. It was saying, listen, if your mastery percentage is below 20% of the school districts in the state of Connecticut, that as a Board of Education, you can apply to the State Department of Education for direct funding of up to 2% of the ECS funding that is provided to the municipality to offset the cost of education. About 4 or 5 years ago, keeping in mind the Board of Education has been an alliance district since 2018, it was about 2020, the Board of Education was enlightened to the fact that this statute still existed. And it was that year that they did apply to the State Department of Education for this funding, and it was granted. And this will continue to be granted as long as the Board of Education is underperforming. Its mastery scores are below the standard set by the state. So the impact of this 2%, the loss of this 2% of the ECS portion that comes to the general fund is $480,737. Again, those funds now go directly to the Board of Education and cannot be used to offset the operating expenses for the boards. Next slide, please. The challenge that we have is, the state keeps intruding into the decisions, the local decision. They keep taking more and more local control away from boards of finance or the fiscal authority of any municipality. Last year, the legislature, in its infinite wisdom, decided to go into Connecticut General Statutes, Section 10-248A, which up until May of last year was a funding mechanism that afforded boards of education to, if they had a surplus in their operating expenses, that they could go to the Board of Finance, the fiscal authority for the municipality, and they can say, we have this surplus and we would like to move these surplus funds into capital reserve to be used for capital expenses for our school buildings. This was a very tidy way to deal with responsible budgeting. It was a way for boards of education to still be able to use all of their appropriation. Maybe it didn't all get spent in operating, but they were guaranteed that it could then be used to offset capital expenses, roofs, windows, interior stair treads, or, carpet replacement, or any of those capital expenses in their buildings. It also provided the Board of Finance in that situation to be able to review budget performance in a whole, not just the spending, but also in relation to what are the revenues. Because the Board of Education is always monitoring their spending plan. Their funding or their revenues are revenues that are coming to the state, to the city of Torrington. They give us an idea what to expect for education cost share with excess cost grant. And we do our best, to guess, as they do their best to guess. How many special education students are we going to have? How many are going to be outplaced by the LEA, the local education authority? How many are going to be outplaced by the state? Or how many new special education students that we receive? This is excess cost. So it's a little bit of a guessing game that we play with that number. In the past, under this Section 10-248, the Board of Finance would be able to say, all right, so how did their revenues, the projected revenues, perform? And how did their spending plan perform? Maybe they had a surplus of $400,000 in their spending plan, but they fell short $500,000 in their revenue. And this was always an opportunity for the Board of Finance to say, all right, as a whole, you're $100,000 overspent in the whole budget, and they could make a judgment call on what to do with those surpluses. Last year, the legislature was trying to address the fact that boards of education had to go to their fiscal authority for this approval, and it was specifically earmarked for those regional schools where they might have to go to 2 or 3 or 4 fiscal authorities for approval of the transfer of surplus funds. Instead of directing this for those regional school systems, one broad brush stroke of their pens, they applied this 10-248 to every municipality. And now the boards of education are in a position where at the end of their fiscal year, if they have surpluses up to 2% of their operating appropriation, they can move all of those surpluses into a non-lapsing educational fund that can be used for any educational purpose, not specific to capital, but any educational expense. So the loss of the ability for the fiscal authority to balance those surpluses against what may be shortfalls in revenue, looking at our budgets as a whole, and we've all seen those audit reports where those budget shortfalls can be significant. But this is the loss of that control, but it also is that there is no accountability back to the taxpayers for how those funds are spent. The Board of Education can make those decisions in a bubble, in isolation, separate from taxpayer influence. Based on last year's appropriation of $78,722,698. If the Board of Education ends this fiscal year with more than $1.5 million, they can move $1.5 million into that account to offset next year's operations expenditures. Questions on that?
That does not count toward the MBR though? How does it? No. Great.
No. And I don't mind telling you, you know, I had lengthy conversations with CCM, our lobbyists for municipalities. They admitted this was an oversight. It was really designed to deal with regional schools that, you know,
That
to
makes
eliminate those 3-4 years. I asked if there was any opportunity that this might be amended again this year, but it looks like it is not going to be amended. So that is a fact that we have to consider in our budget adoption. Next screen, please. So those are the things that, you know, as I'm sitting in my office with department heads and meeting with our financial team, our comptroller and our deputy comptroller, those are the things that you first have to say, all right, let's think about the what ifs. You know, these are the things that we know are going to happen. These are the things we think are going to happen. How do you start to line those up so that we're adopting a budget that is in line with what those revenues are? So this is where you heard Erica talking about our city side budget review process. I'm going to repeat it. The city at level 1, the department heads requested $75,982,270. That was a $5.6 million increase over last year. We knew that there was no way, knowing what these revenues are, knowing what the potential is for revenues to be moved into these outside funding mechanisms for the Board of Education, knowing we were losing $3 million in grant funds for motor vehicle tax grants, we immediately went to work with our budget subcommittee, and they were successful in culling those budget requests down $3,110,175. It was that recommendation that went to the council. The council in last night's action went through every single, there are 45 departments. The council went through every single department, looked at the appropriation for each one of those departments, and moved them to the Board of Finance for their deliberation in context with the revenue. The asterisk sub note here, this 2.5, we're left with a $2,575,483,000 increase. This increase represents 1.5 million, I should read the whole amount, $1,589,875 increase in debt service. This debt service is specific to the construction of the new school. The reason we carved that out is because later on, when we talk about those other revenues, when we went out for bonding in February of 2025, there were bond premiums that were paid by the agencies, the banks that were bidding on these. And so there is a direct revenue offset to help cover a good portion of that $1.5 million.
This is a one-time opportunity.
That is, I use those as one-time revenues. They're one-time when those bonds are sold. So last year we had the same thing. We had $1.5 million because we bonded last year and borrowed. This is a combination. It's not just the bonds, but it's also those bond anticipation notes, which are one-year borrowing terms. There will be one more round, I believe, one more round of bonding in FY26. We have $21 million in bands, bond anticipation notes. So those notes will have to be rolled into bonds. So I do anticipate that there will be additional revenues, one-time revenues next year. But for this year, we have to work with what do we know? The other 983,000 and change, this number is already changing, represents the increase in our health insurance. The reason we left this pending is because we work with a consultant that does projections based on experience in our health care account. And, you know, the more data that this consultant can collect in experience, the finer he can tune the projection. We met with the consultant this afternoon at 2:00. Was it? I think 2:00 today? Yeah. Yeah. So this is already, we're already finding ourselves that we can sharpen our pencils on this number. It's not moving a whole lot, to be honest with you. But we do know that if this number stays the same, that we are going to have to go on the hunt for another $983,000 in cuts on the city side to get to a level fund. Are there questions? Next page, please. So that's the city's side. I do feel compelled to remind everybody that the city and the Board of Education are one entity. Our financials are one financial. When we are audited as one entity. The Board of Education is a department of the city of Torrington. The only difference with this department is it does have a 10-member board that works with their administrative team to oversee the spending that their spending appropriations and a lot of the legal mandates that are imposed on boards of education. Our fire department, our police department, our street department, our, engineering and land use, they don't have the benefit of another board. That's what the city council does. So we see these two budget requests separately because right up until the budget is adopted, they're built by these two different mechanisms. Where we stand with the Board of Education, there was a joint meeting between the Board of Finance and the Board of Education on April 29th. The Board of Education presented their request for operating budget in the amount of $84,452,549. This is a $5.7 million increase over the FY25. They also presented capital requests for facilities capital expenses. Those are the buildings that they need to maintain. And for informational technology, those are the capital investments for computers, laptops, Chromebooks, servers, all those IT necessities in education that are not inexpensive. Their a capital request is $3.6 million. It is a $3.6 million increase over FY25 because in FY25, we level funded their capital, but did provide them additional capital funds from the sale of East School. So there were other funding mechanisms outside of the operating budget that we tried to push their way to help offset some of their capital expenses. The total budget request as it stands right now for the Board of Education is $88,068,028. That is a $9,345,330 increase over last year. Next slide, please. So you heard me in the earlier slides talking about this grand list revaluation and the inequity that happened when there was this overwhelming demand for houses in the city of Torrington and not so much a demand for the commercial properties. So these numbers that are on this page for the board members, these are the numbers post assessment appeals taken by the taxpayers. So Grand List 2023, we always want to compare. What did we look like a year ago when we were adopting a budget? Our Grand List of 2023, I won't go through every line item, but you can see the total taxable Grand List was $2,192,821,223. In 2024, if you look at the real estate, it went from $1.6 million to $2.8 million. That's the lion's share of the increase in the Grand List. The personal property, it did go up a smidge, not a lot. And the motor vehicle, you could see, actually went down. So the GL 2024 post the Board of Assessment Appeals adjustments now stands at $3,430,492,674. Next slide, please. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper for all of you. When we look at those totals for the real estate, trying to determine how do we explain to our homeowners why your taxes are going up more than the taxes go up on the commercial property. So our assessor and the financial team here went to work to break this down for us. As you can see, the breakdown for commercial or industrial utility buildings went from 426 million to 567 million. Residential real estate went from $1.2 billion to $2.2 billion. The PA 490, this PA 490 is, it is a discounted assessment based on farmland or forest land, those properties that are discounted through an application process through the state of Connecticut. As you can see, that is an incredible change in both the PA 490 and in the vacant land. So where the real estate in 2023 was billable at $1.6 billion, it is now billable at $2.8 billion. But the disparity here is very visible where it hits the homeowners versus the commercial property. Next slide, please. I wanted to provide something that was a little bit easier for us to translate to anybody that's trying to understand what that means. So side by side, I did the grand list of 2023 based on those taxable values. The residents were paying or covering or accountable or accounted for 74% of all taxable real estate in the city of Torrington. On the grand list of 2024, you could see what happened. They're now responsible for 79%. And when we add the 1%, which is vacant land, it's 80%. 80% of the tax revenue now will be covered by our homeowners, our residents. Yes.
Could you take a minute and discuss what happened with vacant land going from
Yeah.
roughly
54?
$55,000 to 30 million?
Yes.
Because I'd like to own that vacant land.
I was certain that was a mistake. As a matter of fact, I took a couple of zeros off of it because I was so sure.
Yeah,
I spoke with the assessor, and apparently last year's grand list filing with the state was incorrect. So that is a correction in the proper allocation of those taxable assets.
you know what it should have been?
For last year,
Not 54, not,
no, I don't, but I can certainly ask the assessor to provide us some detail on that. I did press her a number of times to check and recheck and verify and re-verify. And she did. She said that last year, I think they had dozens of properties listed as vacant land. And this year, it's 800 properties listed as vacant land. Hence the delta.
Just out of curiosity, Mayor, in that designation category, is there any breakdown between buildable versus non-buildable vacant land?
On the vacant lands? I'm sure that there is. Yes, and I can, for the council, I can absolutely ask the assessor at our next meeting or the meeting after that to come and do a presentation on what those
Yeah,
breaks.
it's not
Yeah,
going to impact the vote. I mean, it is what it is right now, but it would be nice to know that I would sure that our economic development teams, as many of them as we have, would have that information or should have that information.
I agree. You're right. Because buildable obviously means there's an opportunity for growth there.
right.
If it's a sliver of land that sort of, got
Yeah, well,
forgotten between two pieces of property, there's not a whole lot you can do with that.
Can they also break that down into residential and commercial vacant?
Yes, yes. We can ask her to do that, absolutely. So I think this is the graphic that I think helps to explain to our homeowners why will your taxes go up more than the commercial properties, and why we can't do a wholesale 50% reduction in the mill rate. It's not an apples to apples thing, and we have twisted ourselves up in knots trying to figure out how to smooth this impact over for our taxpayers. Next slide, please. So,
One
yeah.
more thing. This is not only something that has happened to Torrington.
this is happened to almost every municipality in the state of Connecticut. I will tell you, there are a handful of them that have been experiencing it to the degree that we have. Torrington, for any of you that were paying attention in 2020, in the New York Times, they listed Torrington, Connecticut, zip code 06790, in the top 10 destinations for immigration from other metropolitan areas in the country, specifically New York City. So Torrington did see a much larger growth as a result of that. And I'm pretty sure the reason we experienced that is because property values were so reasonable. You know, when you compared a 1,500 square foot house in Torrington to a 1,500 square foot house in somewhere like Fairfield, or even New Haven, it was much more affordable in Torrington. And I think that was one of the reasons we saw the incredible jump in our real estate values. So this page, again, is just showing you what are the steps that we, at this point, it was a joint meeting with the Board of Education, the Board of Finance and the City Council. How do we smooth out that shift in burden to our residential taxpayers? How do we manage that? Instead of seeing a 30 or 40% increase in their taxes, how can we smooth that out over a period of time that is still responsible to running an efficient government? It's responsible to the taxpayers that have to dig in their pockets and find the money to cover these increases, and also is transparent and honest that what you're paying today and what you pay next year at this time covers that increase and doesn't bring it out 3, 4, or 5 years. So there was a recommendation that was brought to the City Council. A lot of deliberations on this. They did ask the Board of Finance for some input on this, and everybody did feel that to be responsible to all of those budgeting methods and the onerous increases, that a 2-year phase-in was in the best interest of taxpayers and our respective budget departments. What does that mean? What does that mean to the homeowners and to the commercial property owners? You can only phase in the real estate portion of the grand list. So what this 2-year phase-in means, that instead of seeing that 100% increase in your property value, in year 1, 50% of the increase will be taxed, and in the second year, 100% will be taxed. So it is a way for us to lighten the load in year 1 and prepare the residents, our residential taxpayers, for that second year. So
Can you
questions?
explain why the real estate is 600 and some odd million different between the first one and the second one?
yes. So the first box, updated 2024 grand list, post Board of Assessment Appeal adjustments, that's 100% of the value based on the assessments. The second box, which is the updated 2024 grand list, because when the council voted and adopted a 2-year phase-in, it immediately changes the assessment in year 1. And those numbers now reflect, for the real estate only, reflect that only 50% of the increase of grand list year 2024 over grand list 23 is implemented in year 1. And that's why there's that $600 million difference.
You said in the first year, you have to see a 50% increase homeowners tax increase, right? If I understood you correct. Then you said the second year, all right, it go to 100%. So if I'm understanding you correctly, with what I've seen in my reevaluation, all right, my taxes are gonna go up about $2,200.
So if I may, I greatly appreciate that everybody's anxious to talk. Right after we go through all these slides, we're open to the public. So if I can ask you to hold that question in your, in your pocket for right now. We'll get through these slides, we'll go through the rest of this, and then we'll open the floor to the public, okay? Thank you. Everybody's good with this? Okay, good. All right, next slide, please. So you heard me talk in the first several slides about what are those challenges that impact our tax base. Part of our budgeting strategy is always to look at how do we put the taxpayers' dollars to work for them. One of those funding mechanisms that we have used in the past is when we look at our fund balance, and for a lot of you that are reading, state budgets and municipal budgets, you might hear it referred to as the rainy day fund. So the fund balance in the city of Torrington is the result of us year over year managing our budgets. Any surpluses in those budgets year after year are held in this rainy day account, this fund balance. And the fund balance is designed to provide any emergency resources for any, it could be a weather-related emergency, it could be a broken water main that destroys a stretch of road, it could be any number of emergencies, but this is essentially the savings account that is used for any of those extraordinary unbudgeted expenses. Those are taxpayers' dollars. The surplus every year gets turned over here, and we start every year at 0 and work with the budget revenues and budget expenses. I wanted to show the boards because I know that there was a question when we had our last meeting. What is in the fund balance? What is a responsible use of the fund balance? And are we always functioning within our policies relative to fund balance and the recommendations that come from our bond rating companies? So we look at this fund balance through 2 lenses. The first lens is our bond rating companies look at this rainy day fund, this fund balance, this savings account, and they're saying, do you have enough funds to cover up to 3 months of operating expenses? That, heaven forbid, there is a cessation in revenues for whatever reasons. And when I first took office, I thought, what would ever cause a cessation in revenues? I thought it's kind of a moot point. I can't ever imagine that there'd be a cessation in revenues. About 4 years later, the state of Connecticut didn't pass their budget on time. And we were faced with a very big decision. Will the state not fund the $23 million in ECS? They actually threatened not to fund $23 million in ECS. So we were faced with a decision of how are we going to make sure that our taxpayers are not going to have to cover this $23 million? So the fund balance became that savings account, that cushion to protect us against that cessation in revenue. Fast forward another 6 years, a pandemic happens. And it happens in such a time, during a timeline where tax collection is going to happen. And the state is recognizing that a lot of people are home, they're not working. And the state was actually imposing some parameters on what to do with the delay in tax collection and some other measures that can be used to provide taxpayers some relief during the period of time before they could all be put back to work. So twice in my 12 years as the mayor, we were faced with a cessation of revenue. So I'm going back to, what is the responsible thing to do when it comes to a fund balance with the savings account? Our bond rating company is saying, make sure you have at least 3 months worth of operating expenses in a fund balance. In I think it was 2015 or 2016, I came to the Board of Finance and I said, let's adopt a goal that we will always maintain a fund balance within this reasonable range. 3 months is 16%. The Board of Finance at the time said, we're not comfortable with 16% of operating budgets. But if we can maintain a goal of between 7 and 10% of operating expenses, that they felt that would be a healthy, responsible funding, use of funds that are taxpayer supported. So you can see from 2014 to 2025, that fund balance has grown year over year. Again, responsible budgeting. Kudos to this Board of Finance and to the Board of the councilmen, that they don't allow all of the departments to spend everything down. If there's a surplus in a salary line item in the police department, they're not allowed to spend it on anything. Those funds get returned and put into this fund balance to be used again in the following years. So this is the progress that we've made towards those goals of staying within the goal range of 7 to 10% and meeting the bond rating call for 3 months worth of operating funds. This has worked heavily in our favor in consistent bond ratings. So these measures have been successful for us in our bond rating, but also in responsible budgeting practices. So I'm just going to light a little again on FY25, the current fiscal year. We have $20 million in our fund balance. Of that $20 million, $3.9 million is assigned. It was earmarked to be used for this current budget year. And there's a high likelihood that we will be using some, maybe not all, but a good portion of that 3.9 million. So next screen, please.
Mayor, question? Just
Yes,
on that.
please. Yeah.
When you do your calculation, that operating expense, does that include the Board of Education?
It does.
Combined budget?
Yes, yes.
you.
You're welcome. Okay. So that screen then sets the stage for us to talk about what are those non-recurring revenue sources, those one-time revenues. You heard Board of Finance member Mrs. Pesky ask about one-time revenues. In the past, to protect the taxpayers from increases in taxes, we've looked at transfers from the Internal Service Fund, that health account. And we've looked at transfers from fund balance, transfers that always maintain that 7 to 10% funding range. Right now, I can tell you based on our monitoring of the Internal Service Fund and the projections for health insurance costs for fiscal year 2026, our recommendation is that we make no changes to the Internal Service Fund. We're We're well enough reserved in that account. Right now, the balance is hovering somewhere around 40% of projected expenses. However, when you are a pool of 300 employees versus 1,000 employees, a couple of employees in the hospital can really drain that 40%. So until we get a better trend analysis on those employees that continue to be provided medical and healthcare benefits in that account, I think we should hold steady on this, look for a 2 or 3 year trend, and then in the future, you'll have a better idea of those funding mechanisms. However, in the fund balance, as you saw on that earlier screen, looking at it through the lens of this policy that says we should never go below 7%, but if we're above 10%, we should put those dollars back to work for the taxpayers. So if all $3.9 million is used in FY25, you heard me say out of that 20 million, 3.9 is assigned for use in FY25. The year will end with a fund balance of 11.855%. If it is in the Board of Finance's judgment that, you know, that we can look at another allocation equal to that $3.9 million for the FY26 budget adoption, that will bring the fund balance down to 8.25%. If the board is looking for more relief, and this is where it starts to get a little dicey, if the board wished to look at what it would look like if the fund balance were brought to the floor of that policy, which is 7%, that would allow us to use about $5.5 million.
Mayor, on that one, that 3.9 million would equate to approximately what decrease in the mills? 1, 2?
One and maybe 1 1/4. Yeah, 1 1/4 mil. Without using that funds, any further slides that we talk about would result in a 1.25% or mil increase. Yeah. So, all right. So the other one-time revenue is, as we talked about earlier, is in February, we went out for the sale of bonds and the bond anticipation notes. The premium paid for the securities was $1,568,860. That it's called a premium. These banks and financial institutions actually pay us at the time that they buy these bonds. And these funds are sitting in our bonded projects account, correct? General obligation, right. So I have a Board of Finance member asking, is the 5.5 million versus 3.9 million in each year or only FY26? The answer is only FY26. Any other questions on this slide?
Mayor,
Please.
and the reason I spoke to the bond ban premium being a one-time, and you were saying, yes, we have to go out and borrow more money next year, so there could be. I was just thinking about the volatility in the markets right now. And that's why I was feeling that we need to look at that as a one-time option.
So these are bonds, less volatility. And
Less
when you've got it,
volatility
yeah.
than the stock
than the
market,
stock market,
but we
correct.
also know that the bond market is.
Turbulent right
Yes,
now.
and
It is
yes.
very turbulent. There's a lot of risk in the bond market right now. We should be concerned about it, but nobody's talking about it.
Right. So we are secured with the bonds that have been sold. These are, when we talk about debt service, these are the bonds that have been obligated already. The interest rates have been locked down and this premium is sitting in our accounts.
Yes,
So for this
for
year,
this year.
correct, correct.
So I would, implore that it's raining, so the 3.9 and increasing it to, you're saying 5 point,
5.
this is taxpayers' money. Take anything, whether it's 1 mil or 1.25 mil, reduction that, the Board of Finance consider that at a higher number than the 3.9.
I echo that as well.
So, and that is exactly why we went through this exercise. Olivia and Erica and I sat and said, I have a tendency to be very conservative. When you get to a 7% of your fund balance, it makes me just a little nervous. But it is within that policy, and that policy was adopted through very careful consideration of the Board of Finance. They were very thoughtful in that budget adoption. So I agree with you. Those funds are available and certainly within the guidelines of our policy. Next slide, please. So what does all this mean? For the people that are sitting here and saying, this is mind-numbing numbers, what does this mean for me? We're, again, making some very big assumptions here. We don't, as a rule, get into this level of detail on revenues and expenses with the council or in this public hearing. This is usually the Board of Finance looking at all of this when they're ready to adopt the mill rate. But what we know is the sooner that we can send information out to our taxpayers, and the more time the Board of Finance has to look at these numbers and hear feedback from the council as to what they think is a recommendation that the Board of Finance should take into consideration. So for that reason, we're 2 weeks ahead of mill rate setting, but I'm going to put these numbers out there for everyone to think about. The assumption that I'm making here is that that the fund balance would be used only to the 8.25% or $3.9 million. That there would be a mill rate set at 38.96 mil. And based on all of the general government revenues, and for the board members, Erica has a spreadsheet that shows you what those general revenue, government, public safety, public works revenues are, and the Board of Education. And even on this size sheet of paper, it's still too small of a print for me. But we're looking at general government revenues, including motor vehicle supplemental, of $8,069,238. The motor vehicle transition grant, assuming we're only using 3.9 million out of the fund balance and adopting a 38.96 mil rate, would reduce that from 5.8 million to 1.9 million. Public safety revenue, for the members of the public that are listening and here this evening, those revenues are for the most part the result of tickets, parking meters, road construction projects where our police and fire are dispatched for extra duty. Those revenues are $955,275. Public works revenues, $119,304. Recreation and city real estate is another $10,000. And the Board of Education excess cost after the Alliance District grants, that 10-262K adjustment is $26,854,936. For the board members, you're going to say, wait a minute, I thought you told me it's only 23 million. The reason this is 26 million is this is where that excess cost revenue gets accounted for. And those revenues are on your spreadsheets here. So we're looking at total general fund projected revenue outside of taxes, $37,924,959. This is still a moving target. It's close, but until the state wraps up their budget deliberations, and until we get our final numbers on what we know to be closer to actual revenues based on trend and based on projection, this is close, but it is still a moving target. Over the next 2 weeks, you may see a slightly different number on this page, but this is where we are today. Next slide, please. So anticipating that somebody might say, it's raining, let's go a little deeper. We did this screen and said, what would it look like if we were to use the fund balance to the 7%, 5.5 million? How would that impact the mill rate? Instead of a 30, what do we have, 38.97? We could lower the mill rate to 38.25. So it's another half a mil. A little over, it's 0.7 mil. Again, the general government funds are the same. The transition grant goes down a little bit because keep in mind that every time we lower the mill rate closer to the cap set by the state, there's less grant funds coming to the city. It's about $200,000 reduction in that grant. Public safety remains the same, public works, recreation city, and the Board of Education number is the same. So if the Board of Finance, when it's time for them to make their decisions, decides this is where they want to land, the revenue in outside of taxpayers' revenues would be $37,715,650. Again, the difference is about $200,000 in the government revenues. Next slide, please. This is the slide that always makes everybody in the room anxious because those are the revenues. How do you make those revenues fit the spending plans? You saw on those first several pages, $2.5 million increase on the city side, $9 million increase on the Board of Education side. How do you reconcile the limited revenues that we have to these expense requests? So this page is brainstorming, for the lack of a better word. What are we looking at? So on the city side, you heard me mention it already. On the city side, if the recommendation is we go digging a little bit deeper, we find that last $983,000, $1 million of cuts. That reduces the increase on the city side from 2.5 to 1.5, keeping in mind that that $1.5 million is debt service directly with a offsetting or, an offset of that one-time revenue, $1,568,000. So that would be something for the Board of Finance to consider. On the Board of Education side, the things that need to be thought about is, what is the impact of the net budgeting of that insurance fund? As you heard in the earlier slides, utilizing or retaining those premium cost share, which in fiscal year 26 will be closer to $2.4 million, allows the Board of Education to reduce that insurance line item and spend that $2.4 million elsewhere in their budget. It is essentially an increase in their spending power, but it does not increase their bottom line appropriation or further impact the taxpayers. The second bullet item in here is to consider the impact of the Board of Education's use of that 10-262, which is the $480,737. Those are funds, again, outside of the operating budget that they annually have to request from the State Department of Education, but it allows them to increase their spending that $480,000. And then, of course, considering the impact of the state's increase in the Alliance portion of the ECS by 1.3 million. And the final consideration is based on budget performance reports, which the Board of Finance had reviewed a little bit in their earlier meeting this evening. If their surpluses as of April 30th continue to hold where they are in their budget progress, there is an opportunity for the Board of Education to have up to $1.5 million in surpluses that they can move into that non-lapsing educational fund under Connecticut General Statutes 10-428. So if the direction that the board wished to go was to level fund in an extraordinary year that is going to create what I would consider to be a tax burden on our taxpayers, if the decision is to level fund every department, that even with level funding, these additional resources are available to the Board of Education above and beyond what they had last year. Next slide, please. I'm not going to light too much on this page. I think that this is a running account of what I've been quote, accounting to the Board of Finance over the years since 2018. I think that anybody who tunes into the Board of Education meetings, and they hear the Board of Education say, we've received, less than 2% increase, year over year for the last 10 years. The fact of the matter is, when you factor in the Alliance funding and you factor in the 10-262K funding, you factor in those premium cost shares that the Board of Education now retains and can deploy within their budgeting appropriation, and the potential for up to $1.5 million. Even if they were level funded in FY26, their total spending for what I call those governmental, outside of their other grants that they receive, the Perkins grants, the IDEA grants, all of those other grants, is $93,778,479. And when you look at that over the amount that was allocated in FY 2018, it is a 25% increase, almost 26% increase in that period of time. Yes, please.
Just out of curiosity, the Board of Ed, just on their salary lines alone, what is the increase due to salaries for their budget this year?
I don't have their budget with me today. I don't.
I'm just trying to break out what their increase is, what's tied to simply salary increases versus educational expansion of programs. Ideally, hiring of teachers, specifically teachers. Yeah.
So the certified staff, it looks like they're looking at a $2.1 million increase, 7.51%. That's just for the certified staff.
Not including the administrative contract that this board actually rejected.
Yeah.
Correct? I guess,
But
you're the, oh, am I not speaking loud? Okay.
Now the whole world can enjoy.
Oh, the whole world. So, this is a lot of numbers for all of us to sort of capture, and particularly those that are in the public. Your presentation is very detailed, but, to be an Alliance district, I think about having contracted with state agencies and an agency was not doing well, they were put on a monitoring. I almost see being an Alliance, you're being monitored
that is
to
correct.
really improve, your schools.
That is correct.
So you know, you're given more money to improve your schools without having any accountability of that improvement. And I think, Mayor, you gave us a really good document to show that, you know, our schools are not improving over a period of time in basic language, reading, math. Am I correct?
So school budget performance reports are available on the State Department of Education, and those are the report cards that do show, yes.
And it's not the Board of Finance, it's just that, you know, the state needs to, I mean, I feel like we need to have our legislative body, you know, hear this, so that they get to have this money, keep spending it. That money increases every year, performance doesn't improve. I mean, I'm trying to simplify it, and yet, you know, so I guess my bottom line is I would level fund, as long as the teachers are continuing to get the contracts that they negotiated. I do feel that, again, request that the Board of Finance, you know, push back and recognize, you've obviously indicated that there's monies available to manage our schools and level fund them.
I think it's also important, Mayor, and I did ask the question of the Board of Education, so it's somewhere in a video of a meeting, but I did ask them. Last year, I asked about the Alliance District funding, and it was told that, you know, that extra money they get every year, they cannot use that to pay for existing staff, existing salaries, or salary increases, that they had to use it for other methods, means, whether it's additional staff, whether it's additional material supplies or whatever. However, when I did ask this year about it again, because I noticed when they gave us a staffing report that positions got moved into Alliance District funding after we approved their budget last year. And I said, how can that happen? And now I was being told that they can contact the state, and if they have a program that might be working, or now that they're shifting grades, you know, to the middle school or to the high school with the shifting of that they can do so. So I did witness at least, I believe it was 6 language arts teachers that got moved into Alliance District funding, and some administrative positions that got moved into Alliance District funding, which totally nullifies what I was told in the past. So what concerns me again is Alliance District funding going directly to them. Again, you're seeing the increase over these years, being told it has to, you know, it has to be additional support on top of it. But now we're being told, well, no, actually, we can actually work with them. If we show progress in something that's working, we can use some of that funding toward existing staff, which now confuses me as a Board of Finance member, because I'm trying to figure out how much of it is covered by, and what new positions, you know, are being supported by Alliance District funding and everything. So I just wanted to, and I did ask that question in public. So it does concern me that we're told they can't supplant, but now they have. So it makes it more difficult for me as a Board of Finance member to look at their requests, as you said, for additional whatever, when I don't know where the money is coming from.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is, I know that when in April, when the Board of Ed sends its budget over by charter, April 15th, it has to be dropped on our desks. They are still not sure what that additional Alliance District funding is going to be. You know, the governor has issued his budget. It does say $1.3 million, but it's kind of like, what's that saying? Until the fat lady sings, you know, it's not over. And
Right.
so they wait until, just like we do for budget adoption, they're waiting for that last vote to take place to make the decision as to what is it that they actually have for Alliance District. So I think when Mrs. Traub is saying that's when they're able to move some of those operating expenses into the Alliance grant, is because that's when they know that they've got those funds.
Do we have,
Yes, please.
do I have the floor? One more time, Commissioner Traub, you said or someone said the salary increases were approximately how much?
2.1 million.
2.1.
It says in here,
I don't want
2.1
percentages.
million.
I want an amount.
You want an amount?
It doesn't have to be exact, within, 100,000,
Yep.
just 2.1
Um,
or something.
2,158,941.
Of the 93, that's of their 9% increase, correct? I mean, that's rolled into that, part of that.
That is included in that $9 million
All right,
increase.
so there's 6.5 to 7% more, not percent, but it's actually in millions, right? That increases in millions, right? So my question is, what are they asking for the additional funding, which is some,
9 million, the 9 million. So 3 point,
being less salary,
yes.
that's my point.
so of the $9 million
Why do they want-
request, their $9 million request, immediately 3.6 of it is capital.
Okay,
And that brings them down to 5.7 million. And of the 5.7 million, based on what you're hearing here, it's $2.1 million for salaries. So the other 3 million are,
It's in their
No.
budget presentation.
it's in there. And if you don't have their budget documents, I know that they, on their website, they do have the budget book.
yeah.
And all those salaries are broken down.
They're
It's
on the website.
It's on our website too.
So I guess, again, I'm not voting, city council doesn't vote on this, as you know, it's unfortunate. So we have to kind of go fishing for information to just get a general sense of how this fits into the larger city budget. Do they expect for that $3 million of, I guess, educational increases, is that money, is the expectation that with that money, they'll be able to move the needle in terms of improving school, performances, or is that just to tread water and hold the line? What are they telling you guys? I mean, they should be giving you that information. And if not, what I would love to hear as a city councilman, I'm not on the Board of Finance, I don't have approval, but I would love to hear, when I was on the Board of Education, I would like to hear, here's the money we need to actually get us off the schneid, as they say in sports, right? To get us up and running and making significant progress over the next 5 years toward goal in our school, okay? Here's the money we need. Here's how we would like it allocated, say, over a 5-year plan, okay? And it's going to be a big number, but show us the steps, how you will spend that to get there.
They did refer, Mayor, they
yeah.
did refer in their presentation to increases in, at the elementary levels, that the math and the reading scores had gone up some. Not obviously in somewhere to get us off of the designation, but
Right,
that,
and
that,
as
that
I know
things
from
were,
many
that
years'
things were
experience.
starting to show some improvement.
All right, the frustration for me is, okay, so in some elementary school classes, they can show, and some of the cohorts, they can show progress. Does that progress translate into middle school? Does it translate into high school, or as it never has,
It never
correct?
has. How long have they been
Right,
in an
right.
Alliance district?
So,
Since 2018.
yeah,
Yeah.
so,
25% more, and we're still there. We haven't fixed the problem. We've thrown 25% more money at a problem and haven't really fixed the problem. So money's not the problem.
the issue to me is, I don't see a plan for solving the problem. You know what I'm
Except for
saying?
more money.
I don't see a plan. I don't know, it's not my
So
job.
I-
The job
yeah,
is for-
again, I'm gonna
that
remind the
job is for
public.
School
Yeah.
administrators to present to the city officials a deep analysis of what is wrong and flawed in the way we're delivering education in our town for a long, long time. That is the role of administrators to do that. They are paid to do that, and no one in a decision-making
Okay,
process
so
gets that.
I have a request for a point of order. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can-
So I do apologize because I do want to get the public an opportunity to speak as well.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So, no, I appreciate your passion. I think we're all as frustrated, including the Board of Ed members. They're as frustrated as we are.
And there was a presentation and a public hearing on the Board of Ed budget.
Right. So, if we could look at the next slide, please. So, and again, now I'm getting really into the weeds of what the Board of Finance does. They take all of this information. They have to weigh all of the, what are those revenues? What are those one-time funding resources? what is the impact of level funding our departments? So they have to look at those things in context to the spending requests. Part of that deliberation also includes a review of year-end projections. In the past, we were always able to look to the Board of Education and get a projection of what their year-end would look like. But in light of 10-2428, I don't think I'm just going to say there's no way. We're not going to see a surplus in funds that would come back into the fund balance from them. But on the city projection, it is still to be determined. We still have 2 more weeks to sharpen our pencils as it relates to how much of the 3.9 million out of the fund balance that was earmarked for use to offset expenses this year. And I just remind everybody, the reason, if you looked at that fund balance performance year over year, we would always earmark these funds available to offset the budgets. And year over year, we weren't using them. But this year is different because in FY24, we adopted the budget on the assumption that we were going to be receiving the $2.1 million of employee premium cost shares to offset the total budget that is impacted by insuring Board of Ed employees. And we did not get that 2.1 million. So 3.9 is looking very much like at least 2.1 of it is going to have to be tapped to fill that gap. So we're still sharpening pencils. That's hence the TBD. Bless you. Next slide, please. So I think we've done enough of the numbers and the where are we and how did we get here. But with the numbers that we're crunching using those one-time revenues, putting into play the council's decision to adopt the 2-year phase-in, if the decision of the Board of Finance is to use the fund balance down to a 7% funding level, we could be looking at a mill rate of 38.25. Next slide. And this is just a summary, and these don't balance, showing those expenses if we are level funded, with the exception of the $1.5 million, which has a specific revenue offset, and how those revenues would be used to cover those expenses.
And that's using the 5.5 as opposed to 3.9.
That is using 5.5. All right. Questions on? I know. So,
Mayor, just going back to page 10, you had $983,000 intact with the healthcare insurance.
Yes.
Is that settled yet? How close are you to determining that cost?
we actually have what I would call a final number. It's in this ballpark. I think, what did we end up, like $30,000 that we can reduce this number by? 23,000, yeah.
And is that baked into the budget already, that cost? Okay.
Yes. Baked into all of these numbers that were presented this evening, but when you go to that last slide, the anticipation is we would have to cut $983,000 out of other departments to cover the increase in that insurance,
On top of our cuts that we already made.
on top of the $3.1 million that's already been made, yes.
And in terms of using the fund balance, we already have some unknowns. So we're looking at the state breaking the guardrails to fund other things already. And I'm wondering if that's going to have a sideways impact of what funds we may receive from the state. Also, you know, in terms of our bond rating, we have to be careful. You know, what if there is a weather event? We don't plan on having a weather event ever, but if we did, you know, that could have a different domino effect in terms of our bond rating and how much does that cost to get the city back on its feet. So you have a series of unknowns here, and so I just want to caution the use of fund balance and at this time, until we could see clear of the state budget and a few other things. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate the comments.
I think also, Mayor, I just want to, most of the budgets, when we went through, obviously your salaries are the increase line that you see first, because of the contracts that are in there. I think what's a little frustrating for myself is as a Board of Finance member, that conversation never gets had with this Board of Finance. So when contract negotiations do come up with all the different unions, they are negotiated, between their respective parties. But I don't believe the Board of Finance is never brought in to say, okay, will this fly? Can we afford it? How is our revenue? How is our rainy day fund? So it is kind of frustrating that after the fact, when we review I review the budget line items and you see the salary increases, which are contractual, they don't know how they're going to pay for it when they do it. So that makes it harder for me now when I'm reviewing, every department's budget. Okay, average 3% increase. Well, where's the 3% coming from in your budget then if we can't afford to give you an additional 3% in revenue for your department? So it causes a little frustration that it's the cart before the horse or whatever. The raises are given and then we say, okay, well, how do we pay for it? And so in years like this, it's very difficult because, we know that other line items have to be cut now in people's budgets because of this. But in years like this, where we know how devastating this is going to be for the taxpayers, to try to hold the line on spending, knowing that they have automatic 3 or 3.5% increases in their salaries.
Other questions or comments? Please.
I think probably my only comment is, this public hearing probably should have 1,000 residents.
I know,
And
right.
business owners here, and I think it's that whole, and I've been on the council for 12 years, and it's typically less than this. But at the same time, when it's really going to hit home is when they get their tax bill.
Exactly.
I know.
And,
Exactly.
those of you who are here tonight, have really looked into it but their neighbors haven't. So the outrage is going to be whenever those tax bills are sent out.
Yeah.
But I think somehow the public needs to know how little control that, you have, and your presentation indicated that on what it is, whether it be the assessment, the Lions, I hate the word designation. It sounds like an award, and it's not.
I agree.
It's really a penalty, I feel like, to our district for poor performance. But but I do think, the outrage is going to come in a few months. So, but I want to thank the mayor for, the presentation, and I know she goes deep into the numbers and, for the intent to be transparent to people. So I appreciate that, and certainly the work of the Board of Finance. So that's all.
So because I know this gentleman is chomping at the bit to get his moment. So if there are no questions on the presentation, then I would like to adjourn this portion of the meeting and open the public portion so the public can have an opportunity to speak. So last call for questions. All right, then I need a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mayor, can I make a comment before we vote, just to your benefit?
Please.
And for people sitting in the audience, I've been doing this for 12 years. This is by far the finest presentation of of how a city is put together financially and what are the driving factors in putting a budget together for a complex operation like the city. It's extremely transparent. It's very intelligent, extremely well done. And I'd just like to thank you for that. It doesn't solve the problems, of course,
It does.
but at least clarity is step one of getting to some sort of better place. So I'd like to thank you for
I appreciate that.
the effort behind this. That's it.
A lot of sleepless nights on this one. All right, so, okay, motion was made, Councilman Oliver. I heard a second by Mrs. Pesky. I'll call this motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Or adjourned. Okay, good. All right. Let's open the public hearing. The reason you are here, and I do apologize that it's long, but as you can tell, there's a lot of information and a lot of things have to be considered. So with that said, it is 8:21 PM. I'd like to call to order this public hearing for the purposes of soliciting citizen input regarding the proposed city budget for fiscal year 7/1/25 to June 30th, 2026. And kindly, thank you. Heather, do you want to read into the record for me the public notice?
Notice is hereby given that the Board of Councilmen and the Board of Finance of the City of Torrington will conduct a public hearing on Tuesday, May 20th, 2025, immediately following a special joint meeting that starts at 6:30 PM in the City Hall Auditorium, 140 Main Street, Torrington, Connecticut, to solicit input from the Torrington residents regarding the proposed city budget for the fiscal period from July 1, 2025 to June 30th, 2026. All interested parties are invited to participate in person or by Zoom. Attendees will each be granted up to 3 minutes to comment. Instructions for participating by phone or online are available at the city website. Copies of the proposed budget will be available at the offices of the city comptroller and the city clerk before the hearing. Dated at Torrington, Connecticut, this 13th day of May, 2025, Carol Anderson, City Clerk.
Thank you, Heather. And I'm just going to stress the public notice requires that you be a resident or taxpayer of the city of Torrington to provide public comment. And just for clarification, because I know that there was some confusion and concern about this, we, through statutory regulations, are allowed to set the guardrails, to set the parameters of a public hearing. And the Board of Finance stressed after last year that the desire was that they hear from the residents and the taxpayers, the people that have to pay the bills for the budgets that have been presented, as opposed to other stakeholders that still have a interest in these budgets. However, it's the taxpayers that have to open up their pocketbooks to pay for it. So that's the reason for residents or taxpayers only. So with that said, you've heard everything I have to say. Let me open the floor to you. I know some of you have already signed up. Charles Vasallo, do you want to step to the microphone and share your thoughts?
Hi, my name is Charles Vasallo. I live on 114 John Brown Road. And one of the Board of Education budget meetings I went to, I spoke about this alternative education, and they were getting funding through grants, and I asked, what happens next year when they can't get grants? Is the tax burden going to be pushed back onto us? And I know my wife spoke about the education, the quality of education, and she asked questions. I guess my frustration is, I feel like I'm speaking on deaf ears. I ask questions and I get nothing back in return as to answers to my questions or what the resolutions to my questions were. And I just feel like I don't know if it's called transparency or lack of communication. Perfect example, this lack of communication that Ms. Trapp was talking about between the unions and the Board of Finance. Who approves these things without going through the Board of Finance? It just doesn't make any sense. So I'm frustrated. Obviously, I don't want to pay more taxes, but there's a lot of people that don't want to pay more taxes, and I just don't understand why they're not here. Is it because the meetings aren't publicized enough to get the word out? I just don't understand it. I came from a small town. We got a lot more than these people, a lot more people involved. So that's all I have to say.
No, I appreciate that you come out every year. You are the couple that comes out every year. I'm sorry. So Richard Laporte, you have the microphone.
Good evening.
Hi.
My name's Richard Laporte. I'm 81 years young. I've been a resident of Torrington all my life, other than the 4 years I spent in the military. And I'm going to go back to the education system. I spent all my years here in Torrington in school. The schools, the teachers were excellent. They were very good teachers. If there were any problems, it was the teachers and the parents. If a child didn't put anything into it, he didn't get anything out of it. And there were parents we know who, didn't back the teachers, and there's too much of that going on. We need to back the teachers more. And if there's a problem, and it seems to be, it's not because of money. A lot of money's been put into it, all right? They need to find out, well, if children aren't making the grade, why aren't they making the grade? And I can assure you, it's not going to be the educators, not going to be the teachers. We've got good people in this town, and we've got some really great schools. Yep. And as far as, people not being here, Ann summed it up. I don't want to call it like the best kept secret in town, but I've talked to many people, and they're looking at the 47 mills going down to 38 mills. They haven't given this any thought at all. But if they sit down and figure out with their reevaluation, like my wife and I did, and we say, gee, you know what? If we get that bill, it's going to be about $2,200 more that we got to come with out of our pocket. And I've talked to a lot of people, and they haven't given any thought to this at all. So when people get those bills, it's going to be a bomb exploding. It's going to be big. Madam Mayor, I would take that week off. I would take my phone off the hook, or I'd lock my door and I'd put a couple policemen outside the door. There's a lot of senior citizens in this town, and there's a lot of people that are low income, and they're not going to have that money to come up with. And it's going to be a struggle. This past winter, I've talked to people who've had electric bills, $400, $500, $600 a month. And then all of a sudden, you're going to tell them, you've got this kind of an increase. I don't know where people are going to come up with that. And our roads are a disaster. Harwinton Avenue, I will not ride south, drive on that road. It is so bad. It's horrible. And I don't know why our roads are that bad. All right. The 38 mil, I'm going to call it 39 mil because that's basically what it is. Okay. It's unacceptable. The people of Torrington, they're not going to be able to afford that. And if I understood you correctly, when you're saying it's like 50% this year, 100% next year, is my $2,200 increase going to go to $4,400 next year? Is there going to be an increase on top of that $2,200?
Oh,
For budget.
I know. So yeah, I keep saying to the individuals that are going to have to control this budget, manage this budget, that is essentially why the decision was, I don't want to speak for the council members, to only go for a 2-year phase-in, because how long do you handcuff that next administration when all the taxpayers know my taxes are automatically going up with no other increases to spending or revenue?
Yeah.
We know they would be going up. So I welcome the council members to
Wait,
speak to that issue.
Can I just speak to the phase-in? Year one, yes, it's going to be 39 mils, but not at the valuation that you received in the mail. So it's going to be, half the increase that you'll, so if you started at 100,000 and your valuation went to 200, your taxed amount at that 39 mils at $150,000. So we'll do some math later on too.
Mr. Iveyne, I'm going to tell you, and Ms. Bino, if either one of you become mayor, and I wish you both luck, you better buy some large bottles of extra strength Tylenol, because you're going to need them, right? And again, I don't know where the
Mayor
people,
gets it from Costco. She's got plenty upstairs.
I don't know where the people of Torrington are going to come up with this kind of money, especially it's going to hit them hard, and it's going to happen quick, I think you're going to expect a lot of delinquencies when it comes into taxes, because people aren't going to have it. And people that are renters, the landlords are going to pass that on to these people. And rents, which are already ridiculous, are going to go even higher. Well, I think that's about all I have to say in my notes. Let me just check real quick here. And I did hear on the local radio station, the only reason I heard a lot about it, I heard Jameer on the WZBG saying people could expect significant increases. When I heard that, and there's some people 25%, I thought, well, maybe $300-400. But when I seen $2,200, I could have fallen out of my chair.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say. I thank you.
No, I appreciate you coming out this evening. Caitlin Hall.
Hello, my name is Caitlin Hall. I live at 156 Country Club Road. Thank you, Mayor, for putting together this the Excel document that was definitely eye-opening. And to the people that are here, I mean, yes, it's woefully inadequate, but for the people that are here, I'm glad that you are here, and I will make it something that I will take upon myself to tell other young families and moms and people that we gotta really get more involved. But anyway, I do have a little letter here that I wanted to read. I have been following the city budget process and have seen the current cuts of 3.1 million. There have been deep cuts to our public safety budgets as well as other departments, yet I see no effort on the Board of Education's behalf to reduce their budget. If the city is flat funding their budgets, the BOE needs to be fiscally responsible as well and flat fund their budget, and the taxpayers cannot afford their significant budget increase. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you.
And I think this is actually Caitlin's second time before the boards. She did speak at the Board of Education meeting as well. And I know it takes incredible courage to come and speak to a board that's this tired and, and figure worry. All right, so that's all that I had that signed up. The floor is open for anybody else that wants to comment. Come on up.
Why not?
What I intend to do is begin a sparse audience here. It's, obviously people aren't aware of what's going on. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to call the Waterbury Republican, the Hartford Current, and our local radio station. And I want to see this like on a front page of what people can expect. To make them aware of it. They have to be aware of it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Laporte. All right, yes, please.
Eileen Vassallo, 114 John Brown Road. The only question I have is, I thought I read somewhere where Mayor Carbone, you were quoted as saying you can expect the mill rate around 32.
Yes, you did hear me say that.
Yeah.
Well,
So let me tell you, in context, 32 would have been the amount we could lower the mill rate to if we did not do the phase-in. 32 on 100% of the value in year one. Because we're doing a phase-in, that's the reason we're now at 38. In year two, I think we can get that down to 33, closer to the 32 number.
Okay.
So yeah,
that explains
absolutely.
that. Thank you.
Yeah.
You did do a great job. I did love the presentation.
Thank you.
I just will make a comment that I do agree on the flat funding for the Board of Ed. I think if there are funds that get rolled in that we have no control over, but they can use for whatever they want, there's no reason why we should increase their budget, which would then lock us in on that minimum budget requirement.
MBR, yeah.
Yeah, okay, MBR, going forward. So I agree with that. And I do appreciate everything that you all do because, as the gentleman said, and my husband commented, there isn't a lot of communication about these meetings. People don't bother going to websites to find out when the meetings are. And then some of them say, well, I go, but what good does it do? Because I really don't have a say in the matter. So that's part of what we hear. But I do thank you for all that you guys do to make these tough decisions. So thank you.
Thank you. And the other thing I'd like to add is, because you have been here for the last few years, and this is the most you've seen. So when you say, you come and you don't feel like you're being heard, I know this board in particular is aching for the taxpayers to come to say,
I was looking for him.
yeah, she was provoking them.
He's come.
So, and the other challenge that we have in trying to get this message out is gone are the days where I grew up when we had 2 newspapers delivered a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. You got your news through a newspaper. You knew where to go to get that information. Nowadays, people are not getting those newspapers. They're looking at social media. Facebook is passé. We might be on Facebook, but that generation is not on Facebook. So it is a challenge for us to get this message out. You know, I'm looking at Caitlin. She's young. She has a young family. You know, I don't even know where you get your information from. It's grapevine. It's grapevine, you know, and that has been the biggest challenge for us is how do we find that communication vehicle that hits all of our demographic? You know, those boomers and the millennials and the whatever those other initials or letters are, or alphabet soup is. So I know the floor is still open. I know, yeah. Floor is still open. Is there anyone else that wishes to address the board? Yeah, please, come on in.
Why not? You're here.
Yeah.
Prepared to say anything, but I'm Christy Bardo. I own the Nutmeg Fudge Company downtown, and
Yeah.
and I also live at 529 Hayden Hill here in town. So I pay my share of taxes. What I guess I'm listening to everything and I hear like reduce, cut, but how, I feel like there's a way to attract more business to the town to help offset some of the residential taxes. So how, is there another meeting that I can come to aside from the other couple of boards that I serve? But seriously, how are we going to attract more businesses to town to help offset, some of the financial responsibility of our residential taxpayers?
Great question. It's the $63,000 question. Back when $63,000 was something.
Something, now it's not really.
Yeah.
profit.
You know, I don't mind saying, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, you know, this is open to the boards. When our mill rate is 47.97, it is impossible to attract businesses. So that was certainly part of the conversation when we were thinking, you know, how do we phase it in? Or do we rip the Band-Aid off and say everybody gets, 100% of that increase in year one, and we can drop the mill rate to 32? How much more attractive would we be to businesses? And you live and work here. You see how a lot of our blighted, abandoned properties aren't attractive to potential development. So all of these past years, we've been working to clean those properties, remove what is blighted and abandoned so that we can provide a blank page for that development. It's desperately needed to level this out. But if I were to pull up that one screen again, I don't know if you were here to see it, that one chart that showed in the grand list of 2023, 3/4 of the tax responsibility, tax burden, I'll call it, rested on the residential taxpayers. And 1/4 of it was the contributions came from the commercial. In FY24, that changed to 80% of the tax burden resting on the residents and only 20% on commercial. And that wasn't because there's less commercial activity in the city. It's because the commercial properties did not increase in value the way the residential properties did. So if you look at a building where Nutmeg Fudge is, that building did not increase in the value the same way that the houses did.
Oh, good. So she won't jack the rent up.
Yeah. So, and I have to give props to the council because, when they're weighing, the benefits of a phase-in, is 2 years the most responsible thing? Is 5 years the responsible thing? Because what do we know? In 5 years, there's going to be another revaluation. Will this market correct itself between now and 5 years from now? We could all be sitting here 5 years from now and our markets decline and the commercial market may expand. So this is it's the proverbial, balloon, you poke it on this end, and it just bulges on the other. Until we get new taxable property, we just keep moving the same dollars around. Who's going to pay more next year? You're absolutely right. I hear you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And it is good fudge. And my grandkids think it's my candy store. So we are still.
I don't know why more people don't come. These are fun meetings,
I
right?
know.
Bring donuts.
Okay.
I wanted to ask something, and I realize this is probably a more like millennial question, and I am, I guess, considered an elder millennial, born in 1984. But do we have a social media manager for the city of Torrington? Do we have somebody that manages like actual social media pages? No.
Well, so we do have, out of our economic development office, we do have a community coordinator, Richard Lopez, who does his best efforts for the social media. But, and because you are the older millennial, I don't know, we haven't ventured into the TikTok realm.
I mean, I don't agree with TikTok, so I'm not on TikTok, but I am on Instagram, and I know other people have like Snapchat and stuff like that. I don't know, that might be
Something to work on.
something to look into to get more recognition, get the word out more, because this really is abysmal. And yeah, it's sad.
It sounds like somebody wants to do a community involvement club.
Yeah, she shows up at one more meeting. I'm recruiting her.
They have
Board of
neighborhood
Finance has an opening.
neighborhood watches. We're going to do like neighborhood informative.
Yeah. All right, because I don't know about all you, but I'm pretty tired. So I do have to call for the public 3 times. So I opened it up with a request for public comment. I'm going to call it a second time. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to address this joint meeting with regard to the adoption of our budget? And I'll call it the 3rd time. Anyone from the public wishing to address the boards with regard to the adoption of the city budget? All right, I'm going to declare this public hearing closed. Declare the public hearing closed. Public hearing is closed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Laporte,